Hi everybody, this is Carl Macklin coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden on behalf of Active Tuts. Alright, let's get started. The topic of this tutorial is AS3 signals. We'll go through it in the following order. First, we'll look at what this tutorial assumes you already know. Second, we'll answer the question, what is signals? Third, I'll show you how to actually use signals. By the way, I'll be using Flash Develop in this tutorial. It's really great and I highly recommend it, but it's not a requirement. At the end, I'll finish off with some final thoughts. So, the first thing that is assumed that you know about is how to set up and use an external library. I'll be using the SWC or SWC file version of Signals. If you don't know how to do that, you can probably still follow along if you just follow my exact steps. There are some tutorials on this site regarding that topic as well. Second, I'll assume that you have some experience with object-oriented programming. Third, you need to have some experience with using the native event system in Flash. Preferably you understand the whole capture and bubble phase flow as well. It wouldn't make sense to start working with signals unless you have at least a grasp on how OOP and the native event system works. So, what is Signals? Signals is made by Robert Penner, and you might recognize his name from his easing equations, which are quite widespread in the Flash community. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and quote Robert's own description of Signals from his GitHub page. Signals are lightweight, strongly typed AS3 messaging tools. It lets you wire your application with better APIs and less boilerplate code than AS3 Events. Part of the concept behind it is a signal is essentially a mini dispatcher specific to one event with its own array of listeners. A signal gives an event a concrete membership in a class. Listeners subscribe to real objects, not to string-based channels. Event string constants are no longer needed. Signals are inspired by C# events and signals and slots from the application framework called Qt. Signals consists of several classes, but the ones you'll probably focus on the most are the following three. First, the most basic signal type, which acts like an object that you can add listeners to and then dispatch, just like a regular event. Upon dispatch, the listener function will be called. You can optionally define value classes in the constructor, which will enforce these values to be passed along in the dispatch. Subsequently, any listener function must of course accept these arguments. Now, signals are quite flexible in that you can skip the value classes in the constructor and still pass along arguments. Still, of course, you must make sure any listener function expects these arguments, and this will be verified the moment you call the add function. If the check fails, an error will be thrown. There's also an add once function, which lets you add listeners that will get removed automatically after the first time they are called. Second, there's the Deluxe signal, and this of course inherits the same functionality that the regular signal has. But it also allows you to optionally specify a target for the event in the constructor of the signal. Also, when dispatching this signal, you can optionally pass along a generic event, which is another class from the signals package. This event can be received in any listener function, and from that event you can access the target of the signal and the signal itself. The Deluxe signal allows for event bubbling through the parent property, just like in Flash's native event system. Any class that implements the iBubble event handler interface can intercept the bubbling phase and act upon it, and there decide whether or not it should continue bubbling. Finally, the Deluxe signal also allows you to add listeners with priority. Normally, listeners are called in the order that they are added, but this lets you control that more exactly. The third and last signal type is the native signal. This one is designed to work together with the native Flash events. All the mouse events, timer events and whatnot that you're used to. In the constructor of a native signal, you can specify the target dispatching the event, for example a sprite, and the type of the event, for example a mouse click event. The signal will then automatically set up a listener behind the scenes for you and dispatch itself whenever that native Flash event is dispatched. Alright, enough talking without showing. Let's get started. Alright, so I'm gonna put up the link for Robert Penner's GitHub page above this tutorial. And I want you to go here and download signals, basically. And as I said before, we're gonna use the SWIC file. And you can find that by going to downloads and clicking the latest zip file which contains the SWIC file. Alright, with that downloaded, I'm gonna go ahead and create a new project in Flash Develop. Call it signals testing. Here we go. Alright, so first you just want to make sure you put the signals SWIC into your library folder. So you have that in your project. And in Flash Develop, I'm just gonna add it to the library. Alright, I'm gonna start off by removing this stub here. We don't need that right now. Okay, so let's start by making a small button. Actually, we're gonna make a class for that. I'll have it extend sprite. And let's give it some graphics. Gonna give it a nice red color. And just like a cooking show, I come prepared and I know these numbers by heart. Isn't that awesome? Let me close that one. All right. Wanna promote this to a class member and check if this is working. All right, that works. I'm just gonna reduce the size of the project so you can see a bit better. All right. Excuse me. All right, so what we're gonna do first is just add a signal to this class and make sure that whenever we click it with the mouse, it's gonna dispatch this signal. So since we're gonna be clicking stuff, I'm gonna add a native Flash Event System event listener. And that's where we want to dispatch our signal. So I'm gonna go ahead and add our signal. I'm gonna call it clicked, since that's when we want it to trigger. I'm gonna promote this to a class member, but we're gonna make it public instead. So here in the onClick function, we are going to dispatch the signal. Now, in our main class, we can access this signal right here. And here you can see some of the functions I mentioned before. We have the add one, That's for adding listeners. Add once, of course, like I told you before, adding listeners like a one-shot thingy. So whenever the listener is called, the listener is removed from any future dispatches. Dispatch does what it says. Num-listeners, that's a property that tells you how many listeners the signal currently has. Remove, for removing a specific listener. Remove all removes all listeners. And value classes, that's what I mentioned before. If I were to specify here in the constructor a string, for example, then this array, as you can see it is, would contain that class of string. So I'm not sure whenever you'd use that in your actual code other than debugging and finding out, okay, what is my signal expecting right now in the dispatch. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and add a listener on red button click. And just trace this out to see that it's working. You clicked the red button. And there we go. So that's basically the regular signal type in action. All right, so after red comes green. So let's make a green button, and I'll demonstrate the Deluxe signal for you. All right, and make this here a bit quick. A nice green. And I have a feeling 200 would work just fine there. All right. And what do you know? It fits perfectly. All right, so we're gonna add a Deluxe signal to this sprite. And here you can see the target property. It can be of any object type, basically. It doesn't have to be like an display object or anything like that. So for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just gonna use this, as in this green button. That is the target that is dispatching this signal. Promote it, make it public. And of course, I want to make sure that this signal is dispatched whenever we click this sprite. All right, so green button dot clicked dot add on green button clicked. So far, we have a signal that works just the same. Now, the cool thing here is we can put in a new generic event in the dispatch call. Of course, we gotta make sure our function here expects it. And I'm gonna comment that out. Here we can trace out the event, and we can get target, and we can get the actual signal. So let's try that out. As you can see, we're tracing out the target, which is the green button, and the actual signal is the Deluxe signal. Alright, so I want to demonstrate bubbling for you as well. So let's start our bubbling. Gonna add another yellow button. We will make it yellow, and I'm actually gonna make this a rectangle, or square even. So I'm gonna make this sprite a child of our green button instead. Alright, so let's see if this works. So we have our yellow square here, which is a child of the green button class. Obviously we're clicking the green button class right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and comment out this. So in our yellow button, gonna listen for the native click event. Also, we're gonna make our own Deluxe signal in this one. This is the target. I want to make this public as usual. When we click it, we want to dispatch our Deluxe signal. And just like before, I'm gonna pass in a generic event, but this time, as you can see in the constructor here, you're given the choice of adding a default boolean for bubbling. So I'm gonna put true here. And actually I'm gonna ignore this dispatch here. So what's gonna happen is the signal here is dispatched, and we're asking it to bubble. So it's gonna go through the parent property, and the parent property in this case is the green button. And it's gonna check around, like, is anybody there to capture this bubbling or not? If not, it's gonna continue. And the way to capture this is to implement the interface of iBubble event handler. So this function, there's just one function in this interface. It requires you to return a Boolean value, and that value determines whether or not the bubbling will continue further up. All right, so green button caught the bubbling. Let's try this out. Oh yeah, sorry. As I just said, we have to return something. I'm gonna return true here. And as we click the yellow button, the signal bubbles through parent and gets caught in the green button. So we're going to go ahead and try this in our main class as well. Main caught the bubbling. We can return true or false here, it doesn't really matter at this point. All right, so as I click, first the green button catches it and then main catches it. And notice here, if I return false here instead in the green button, then we will only get to the green button and not down to main. So that's how bubbling works. And the cool thing here is I'm using display objects here like sprites and or rather display object containers, and as you know, that has the parent property, and that's what Signal is using to traverse the objects. But it doesn't have to be display object containers. It can be any type of object as long as the parent property, which should be public by the way, forwards the signal to the next object. Alright, so let's go ahead and make a blue button and look at the native signal instead. Alright, so let's look at the native signal. So we'll make a blue button this time. Yeah, we need this. A nice blue, and I have a feeling this should look nice. Here we go. All right, our nice blue circle. All right, so let's go ahead and add our native signal here. And as you can see here, the target has to implement iEventDispatcher, so things like sprites and timers and stuff like that will work just fine. For this case, we're actually going to click this sprite, so that's what we're going to listen for. And we'll be listening for the mouse click event. And that's basically it for setting this up. Oh yeah, I want to promote this to a class member and make it public. Then here we can go to blue button.clicked and choose to add on blue button clicked. You clicked the blue button. All right, this will almost work, except that when this signal is dispatched, it will always give you the native event as an argument. So in this case, we're listening for a mouse event. So let's look at that. We can grab one of the variables there. So as we click it, you can see it works just as expected, and we get the native signal passed through. And that's basically it for using signals. Oh yeah, one more thing though. This is probably overkill, but there might be someone out there asking about this specifically if I don't show it. So here goes. Let's say we want to remove the listener. We can either remove all and nothing will happen when we click it, or we could specifically remove the listener we have added. and it works just the same. There you go. Alright, so I'm gonna wrap it up with some final comments. You should try Signals out for yourself and see what you think of it. I'm not gonna tell you what to think about it, but I can tell you that I personally think it's great, easy to use and all that, and it makes more sense to me than the native Flash event system. I personally use it when working with robot legs and also game programming frameworks like Flixel and Flashpunk. If you have comments and suggestions about Signals, then Robert Penner will gladly listen to you. He's a great open source community-minded guy like that. Finally, thank you for watching. Hopefully you've learned something you'll find great use for in your programming.